All right, one of the big questions out there is around assessments. Should you use them? Could you use them? Should AI be involved? And that's what I want to unpack in this particular episode. I have on Charlotte, and you're going to love this episode because she and I go back and forth a lot. We agree on some things, and some things we kind of see it a little bit differently. So if you're considering how to leverage assessments in your platform, whether it's frontline hiring, knowledge workers, or more importantly, using it for internal mobility, then this is the episode for you. Welcome to the channel. I am Trent Cotton, the human capitalist. I've noticed that there is a big difference between HR business practices and how business actually gets done. I've spent over 20 years in HR helping the C-suite rebuild their organization while the world around them shifted. I've designed this channel to be an intelligence briefing on the business of people. So if you're a CEO, board member, or a CHRO looking for the signal in the noise, welcome to the channel. Now, let's get to work. All right, welcome back to the Human Capitalist Podcast. I am your host, Trent Cotton, and I am joined by someone that I met on LinkedIn. It's one of the things I like about LinkedIn, not their algorithm, but I do love the connections that I make. And sent her a message and said, okay, we're going to have to unpack this topic on the podcast. So Charlotte, welcome to the Human Capitalist Podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation.
Awesome. Well, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about your background, and then we'll dive into some current events.
Yeah, well, to keep it short, so my name is Charlotte. I'm the CEO of Equalture. We are an HR tech company based in the Netherlands, so we have some distance between the two of us.
A little bit.
And we are a game-based hiring intelligence platform. So we have developed game-based assessments that help you hire more based on potential rather than what you did before, right? And what we also do, and that's where the hiring intelligence part comes from, is that we really help our clients not only use an assessment, but more importantly, also really build that predictive engine in terms of what skills actually make someone either very successful or unsuccessful in my particular organization, in my particular context, mainly for a frontline hiring organization. So that will bring us in a second, I think, to the reason why we are here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's dig in. You were talking about gamifying and the kind of that assessment part. I want to share a SHRM article. It caught my attention because it had a new term, and I feel like every other month there's this new term that applies to the workforce or hiring or something to go on with HR. And the title of it is The Rise of Skill Phishing, What Leaders Need to Know Now. And so I was like, what in the hell is skill phishing? So it was really kind of interesting, just kind of level setting. It's the act of presenting skills, credentials, or capabilities that do not translate into real execution. So again, we're giving a name to something that we have always experienced, which is the person says that they can do these things. 90 days into the job, you're like, you have no clue. So really, really interesting that this is becoming such a huge thing. I think with AI, this is where it's getting a lot of notoriety because, candidates can go in and say, I have the qualifications, so write my resume, and it doesn't really kind of check out. So, I mean, you've got a pretty unique view considering your background and kind of what you do in your day job. What did you think about this?
It's funny because I actually just posted an article on LinkedIn myself on the fact that candidates game. Well, I was speaking about assessment specifically, that you can sort of hack that now. But what you're speaking about, like skills phishing, is of course a little bit broader. So yeah, I think that in the era of AI, it's very easy for candidates, right, to polish their CV and to write a very nice cover letter that exactly fits like what you've put into the job description. I am actually extremely happy about the fact that this happens, because I think it's an opportunity to finally expose the poor instruments that we've been using for such a long time. I think that if it would have been up to me, the CV would have been long gone, motivation letters would have been long gone. And I think we've now found out that these can very easily be manipulated with what we do. So I'm very happy with it. And to be fair, and I mean, I'm saying this as the CEO of an assessment company myself, right? But if I would have the opportunity to either polish my CV or hack an assessment making use of AI or whatever, I would have done the exact same thing, because I think candidates just want to get the job. So yeah, why not do it? So
Right,
I think
right.
that we should learn from skills phishing more in the sense of let's not blame it on candidates' ethics or whatever, but just as a very valuable learning experience that the tools that we've always been using in recruitment, they're
Mhm.
long overdue. But we realized it only just now.
Yes, I agree with you with, let's blow up the use of the CV or the resume. I want to add to that. Can we actually get a job description and not a job advertisement? Because it
Yeah.
seems like we've gone away from looking at the job description as a scorecard to evaluate someone's skills and competencies into how do we make this nice, shiny, like a commercial to try and attract people in. And especially when you layer AI on top of that, if it's looking at a job ad, it's hard. Like I reviewed a JD the other day that somebody sent me. We're looking for a dynamic, and I just struck the word. And the individual said, "Why did you strike that word?" I said, "How do you measure dynamic? If you can tell me how to measure that, then keep it in the job description. If not, take it out. It's
Yeah.
superfluous." But one thing I do want to call out, definitely go in and read the article. I'll put a link to it in the description. I do want to give kudos to SHRM because I don't normally give kudos to SHRM, but they're number two on recommendations of how to handle skill phishing. I think is important because they say do not assume that someone is skill phishing just because they used AI. To me, it's really interesting how you're looking at what's needed in the workforce. And I think, if you look at the trajectory and the number of times that AI has begun to be mentioned and AI capabilities, AI literacy is starting to creep into these job advertisements. It's been on a steady increase since 2023. So we have that going on, but then we penalize candidates who are leveraging AI and showing that they have literacy. So it's a little bit of a paradox that I think we need to fix in
Yeah.
the market. And it does call out, to your point, and number four, use more skill based assessments. In my day job, and I'm all the time in workforce data. One of the interesting things about Gen Z compared to kind of the several times that assessments has popped their head up, previously candidates would lose their mind. I'm not taking an assessment.
Yeah.
Hire me because I am qualified. Gen Z is looking at what's going on and saying, okay, well, I can't compete and stand out on a resume because everyone's doing the same thing. Give me the opportunity to show off my skill set and then match me to the right job. So I think it's really going to cause the industry as well as HR departments to really reassess that whole process. And I think it's going to be for the better for retention, but also
Yeah.
too, I mean, if I'm in a job where my skills are being used, chances of me being more passionate and happy at the job greatly increase. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, for me, this is of course a great time to be alive with my company because
Yeah.
let's be fair, all the signs lead to you have to
Yeah.
use a skills assessment. But what I very much like about that is that and it ties very well into the comment that you made about Gen Zs is the reason why I've started Equalture is because I wanted to make sure that every candidate gets the exact same opportunity to showcase these are my talents, my skills, my behavior, what I like, what I don't like, and get hired based on that because that's actually going to determine how you're going to perform in the role.
Hmm.
Um, Much more than what's on your CV, and especially nowadays, right? Jobs are constantly changing. Hiring for what someone did before is useless in 2 years' time. So I
Right.
think we could better than at least evaluate candidates on can you learn quickly, can you adapt well, like those kinds of things. But the nice thing is that indeed, I think that assessments for a long time have also been perceived as, oh, if that's part of the process, then maybe I will drop off. It's also because a lot of assessments are not fun, right, to go through. It's one of the reasons why
Right.
we went with a game based format. But now that it's being brought back into the equation because we see that shift with Gen Zs that you described, but also because of the fact that CVs are just becoming less valuable.
Hmm.
That brings me to the core of why I actually do it because this is the way where everyone gets the same opportunity to get hired for a job again. So I think that it's interesting that everything that's happening in the market, also thanks to AI, without us really being aware of it, actually I believe is going to make the labor market much more unbiased and fair in the long run.
I think so too. And I mean, we could probably spend another hour talking about how, yes, there's a lot of conversation around AI introducing bias, but it's also a great way to solve for it. But we'll share that
Yeah.
for another conversation. And it's kind of funny because, what you're talking about leads right into the next article from the World Economic Forum. And it talks about meet your new coworker and it being AI. And one of the things that really just kind of jumped out at me is it says that HR leaders also have a role in helping companies navigate this transition to reap the full benefits of their new hire, both customer facing and talent HR perspective. And it cites a report from MIT about embracing agentic AI offers possibilities not to
Yeah.
only improve cost efficiency, but also expand revenue and compress learning curves. And I'm glad that they call that out because there is a lot of benefit there. But what say you?
I really agree. I think that, well, I would hope that most organizations have embraced AI in their daily work.
Hope is that key word, right?
Yeah, I think for a lot of it didn't happen. Still, like if I look at ourselves, we are a small company. We are a tech scale up, right? So we have that tech savviness in our DNA. But still, like we
Mhm.
use Claude now in our daily work. But there's so much to work with, to learn from. So we've also said like we want to hire like trainers and stuff like that to make sure
Mhm.
that we are getting better equipped, and that all comes from like the people function that we have in our company. So I do really believe that it's a bit twofold. One, from an HR or culture perspective, we really need to start focusing our learning and development efforts, I think, much more into how do you create that adaptive mindset and that innovative mindset that you constantly want to look into the new technologies and how to embrace that in your daily work. And at the same time, we also need to start hiring people more actively who are comfortable with that, right? Because not everyone is
Right.
comfortable with constant changes and new technologies every month being introduced in the company. But I definitely believe this is the responsibility of a CHRO at the end of the day, AI adoption in a company.
No, I think that's a great call out, and I think this is a time for HR to really step in to this and lead this charge. And if you're not up for it, then my encouragement is to step out of the industry because this is
Yeah.
going to make or break the validity of HR. So let's shift gears. Frontline hiring. So you responded to a post that I did for my day job about frontline hiring and some of the stats. And
Hmm.
it was fascinating to me. I love your opening line in your comment. I'm gonna read it out. It says a lot of frontline hiring processes are still built to filter people out as quickly as possible. The problem is the best frontline employees don't always have the best CVs or the patience for a broken application flow. I do not know anyone who could have made that more succinct or eloquent in stating the problem. So I mean, let's talk about frontline hiring. It's a huge topic. Just did the June workforce report, so looking at what's going on in the U.S. market and EMEA market, but also look at what's going on in frontline hiring. One of the interesting things is that the number of jobs keeps increasing. However, the application flow is going down. So whenever I saw it, I immediately thought about our conversation. I was like, I wonder if Charlotte thinks that maybe people are just getting burnt out with the application process. So what just kind of give us a view. What's going on in frontline hiring from your point of view?
So I think a couple of different things, and feel free to interrupt or add to that, obviously. But well, to start with, frontline hiring is always high volume. Well, most of the time, it's high volume in nature, so it requires a process that can handle a lot of a large scale. In that sense, it's very different from like corporate recruitment.
Mhm.
Yeah, requires a very different process design. The other thing is that for most frontline positions, if not all frontline positions, I think the CV is completely useless because most of the frontline positions are more skills jobs, more soft skills job. Like if you're hiring someone in a shop or in a call center or in a sales position, it's certain skills, right, that you need to have, and like
Right.
certain behavioral aspects and that make you either successful or unsuccessful in that role. So it makes a CV not relevant at all to look at. Still, I think if you would look at the average job application procedure of frontline positions, I think you will be surprised by the number of companies that actually still ask for a CV.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think there's the third challenge that comes into the mix, and that is that I always have the feeling that companies feel like I need to make a decision between, am I going to prioritize an easy job application process but with lower quality, or I need to raise the bar, but therefore more candidates are going to drop off because it's a more complicated process. And I think that a lot of companies just haven't figured out, like, there is a way to do that both if you do that in the right way. And I think that starts with get a CV out of that process. A lot of candidates will drop off
Right.
instantly if they see that they have to upload a CV. It's a huge barrier, especially for the really operational roles. I think that some companies then have taken the opposite approach, like, okay, let's take out the CV, but let's take out every single step of the process. So you only have to leave your name and we are going to call you. That's also not
Right.
scalable, right? Because then you end up with like thousands of job applications that recruiters need to handle manually. So I think there's a way in between. And we see that also working with frontline organizations that we work with. And it's actually not that hard. But for some reason,
Mhm.
most of the frontline organizations don't do it.
Yeah, and I love how you call out this misunderstanding that something has to be binary. If you look at the
Mm-hmm.
knowledge worker, the binary problem that I usually would have to consult organizations and go, okay, this is not binary. They think that they have to sacrifice quality for speed or speed for quality, and that's not the
Exactly.
case. There's
No.
right there's a happy medium. Sometimes you just need to blow up the entire process. I think it is more acute in frontline hiring. So you also shared some data points that I thought were really, really interesting on the post. But like, what are some of the data points that you're seeing that leads you to kind of be able to state this hypothesis?
Well, so maybe let's give a bit of an anecdote of one of our
Yeah.
customers, or at least let's talk about our frontline customers in general. So then we speak about like retailers, like a Rituals and
Hmm.
Essex, but also Vodafone for call centers, like those kinds of companies. I think that what they have done very well, and that's indeed the part where I fully agree with what you're saying. They found out we don't have to pick one or the other, so we don't have to
Hmm.
compromise quality in order to get quantity, and vice versa. It's actually funny. I spoke to I'm not going to mention the name, but I spoke to a global retailer this last week, and the head of recruitment told me I'm so we are speaking with every single candidate who applies to one of our job openings because we are a retail brand and our candidates are also our current slash future customer. So we
Yeah.
want to treat them well. In theory, that sounds very humble, right? But in
Yeah.
practice, it means two things. It means one, sometimes they receive 100 applications on a job and they have to hire like hundreds of recruiters to cope with that skill. So it's not sustainable at all. The second
Mhm.
thing is that they actually also received quite some feedback from candidates saying, if everyone is just invited for the sake of being invited, then I don't know if you actually invited me because of my talents and my skills or whatever, or just because you want to stick to that rule. So they actually did that in order to maintain a very positive candidate experience. But without them being aware of it, it had quite the opposite outcome
Mhm.
actually of the process. And I think that something that we have seen with well all of our frontline hiring clients at the moment is that candidates just want an experience to be fun and quick and easy and fair. And
Mhm.
fair is, by the way, a surprising factor because maybe you would say like not maybe the top comment that I would have in mind from candidates applying for a frontline position, but it's actually a comment that we get quite often. So what we see with our clients who actually approach it well is that they can achieve a very good candidate experience, but at the same time they can also optimize for a very efficient process while improving the quality of their hire. So they actually manage to do it all at once just by structuring their process in one unified way that I
Yeah.
see working across all of our frontline customers that we have at the moment. Um, which is basically the following process. A candidate applies preferably through a conversational AI flow, WhatsApp, Messenger, whatever. Just not a boring form anymore, but just an interactive conversation that asks them about the hard knockouts for the job.
Mhm.
Um, it's very easy for candidates to go through. It's of course very convenient for the recruiters that everything therefore is fully automated in terms of the hard skill check, let's say, and the hard requirements check. Then the next step is that every single candidate who passes those knockouts, let's say, is instantly completing our set of game-based assessments. Takes just a couple of minutes for them to complete, so we keep it very short, and we only measure, and therefore we only include the games that have proven to capture the skills of their most successful workers. So for Vodafone, for call center workers, or for rituals, for people in the stores, we first really benchmark their own workforce, who are their high performers, and what do they have in common. And only these games are included in the process to keep it very relevant and short. But if candidates then do well on those games, we also know that you basically have what it takes in order to be successful in that frontline position.
Yeah.
And as soon as you've passed that, you can immediately schedule an interview, and then the rest of the process continues. And then obviously we always advise to limit the number of interviews that you will have. But the nice thing is that everything up until a first interview is fully automated, highly efficient for the recruiters, highly efficient for all the managers, because there's no screening work anymore. And the fun thing that we see as well is that candidates actually really like that process, because they had the feeling this was fun, this was fast, but I also really had the opportunity to showcase who I am. So as a result of that, because you asked me, it's a very long answer to your short question, but you've asked me about the data. So what we see is that candidate experience is always 4.5 out of 5 stars or higher. So they really like the experience. We see that usually the time to fill is up to like 7 to 10 times faster.
Wow.
Hiring managers save on average 5 hours per hire, because they just don't have to screen anymore, and only they see fewer candidates on an interview, but the relevance of those candidates is better because we've already tested them on do you fit the role, basically. And then last but not least, because that's also, of course, the end results should also be there, we see that early attrition is usually reduced by somewhere between 30 and 45%. Depends a little bit on the role. So I think very impressive results. And we see those consistently for all of our frontline hiring customers who've structured their process like this.
And it makes sense. I mean, it gets back to what we were talking about earlier. If you're assessing me for skills that I have and I'm working in a job, it's going to increase the retention rate just naturally. I think there's this really weird concept that managers think that candidates who don't have the skills on a job, that they're happy, and that's I've never met someone that left because, the job was changing and it was going to require a skill increase and they didn't have the skill set or they didn't have the need. I've never seen that person happy, and in fact, they were looking for
Yeah.
something that would be better aligned. And, there's a lot of talk about skill-based hiring and kind of this rising need for soft skills as a result of AI. If you've got, technology kind of handling some of the things that that can be automated, that are kind of, I call it grunt work or manual work. It really does kind of rise or increase the need for some really strong soft skills.
Yeah.
How do you recommend a practitioner who's listening, how do they approach identifying which assessment they should go with that will drive their success and hit some of the KPIs that you're talking about?
Yeah. Well, 3 different things here. One is, I think that it's great that you mentioned that, because I think especially in frontline hiring, you see that a little bit less, of course, with more white collar hiring in that sense. But I think that sometimes the perception with frontline hiring is that it's just a volume game. Doesn't really matter what skills people have. We just need to push them through the process as quickly as we can. Definitely not true. Soft
No.
skills do determine not only whether you're indeed, exactly like you mentioned, it doesn't only determine whether you're going to be successful in the role, but it also is going to determine whether you like the role. Like, to give
Mhm.
you an example, we work with DHL globally to hire logistics workers, and we know that if we have an assessment, for example, that captures, do you prefer working in a very fast environment that requires a lot of productivity and moving fast, but you will make some mistakes along the way, or the other way around? You are
Mhm.
very accurate, have a great eye for detail, but you don't really like being in an environment where everything just needs to happen fast and there's time pressure. it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the fact whether you're going to be successful in the position, yes or no, but it will determine whether you're enjoying being in that position. And that
Exactly.
still fuels early attrition if you then hire people who just don't like that environment. So I really hope that we are going to learn that soft skill assessments are not only there for white collar positions, but that they're actually very relevant also for more operational frontline positions. Then my second point is, if you are considering a soft skill assessment, it's great. I always said it to all of my customers. It's great if you're using assessment, right? Because it can help you create a more objective impression of a candidate. But it's only great if you also know what kind of outcomes you're looking for. And what I see happening way too often is that large enterprises buy an assessment tool, just ask managers, hey, what kind of competencies do you think are important? They just click a couple of them from the list, and that's the test that's being sent out to people. Then you're basically just putting your bias into a scoring model. It's based on nothing. So if you consider making use of an assessment, then always make sure to first benchmark your existing workforce. You can just use the assessment that you're going to work with for that. So just ask a couple of your high performers to complete the assessment, and also a couple of your lower performing people, and just
I was going to
identify
say
the
that's
patterns between
important.
those. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you need that perspective, right, between high and low, because only then you're going to find out what are the common denominators amongst the top performers that we don't see for like the medium and the low performers. Very, very important. Otherwise, an assessment is only going to, it's not going to bring you anything in the long run, especially not when it comes to attrition. And then the last part, finally, and this is, I'm a little bit biased, obviously, right, with the business that I have, but if you're on the lookout for an assessment, make sure that you go for an assessment that is candidate friendly, because candidates expect that. They don't expect like the very long 1.5 hour black and white assessments anymore. But also make sure that it's AI resistant, because you don't want to use an assessment where people can just upload it in ChatGPT or Claude and it will tell you what the answers are. Then you still won't get any relevant insights from that. So go for an AI resistant format. Make sure that you calibrate your assessment based on what actually works amongst your top performers, and make sure that you make your hiring manager aware of the fact that soft skills are important for every single role, not only to be successful, but also to fit the environment. And that applies equally for operational roles as it would apply to like roles in your headquarters.
Makes complete sense. I'm going to tack on 3 pieces of advice just based off of my experience. The first one, assessment should not be pass or fail. You already said this. This should be an additional view into the candidate or the employee, and we can kind of talk about pointing this internally next. But it should be a 3-legged stool, and this is how I always used assessments in my practice. Is we evaluate a candidate, whether we're going to hire someone based off of their experience and skills that are represented in the job description against the resume, that have been validated in the interview feedback. And then the assessment is another part of that 3-legged stool that gives us some additional insight that says, okay, we're hiring for this very critical role. It's, let's just say, senior project manager for our largest program. There needs to be some critical thinking. Well, I can see in the person's resume they have the experience to do program management. We have validated that with the screening throughout the interview, and they tested high on critical thinking on this assessment. But then we also further validated that in the interview process. We heard it in their examples. That to me gives you as much of a holistic view of a candidate. It's not 100% accurate, but it's a heck of a lot more accurate than just going, a 1-to-1 ratio. So make sure that you're doing the kind of that 3-legged stool, and it's also easier for defense to be able to go in and say these are the 3 different areas that we look at to evaluate. The next piece, I do want to kind of go back and double down a little bit on what you said. Measuring your top performers and your low performers. I guess my advice is actually to get someone to test their entire department, and then kind of go and kind of reverse engineer, because a lot of times what happens, or at least in my experience as a practitioner, managers have their top performers or their high performers, and 50% of them being a high performer is the fact that they get along with the manager. They just click
Yep.
internally, interpersonally for some reason. So to remove that bias, just test the entire team and say, okay, on your team, these are the people, looking at the KPIs, these are your high performers, and don't associate any names with it. And according to the KPIs and how they're performing against those KPIs, here are your lower performers. Here are the competencies. Because when you try to clone an individual, you may just be cloning the fact that that person gets along with the manager, and to
Yep.
your point, you're just replicating bias. That's
Yep.
one of the bias that no one ever talks about whenever you're looking at assessments, and I think that one is probably the most pervasive. The last
Fully
part,
agree.
you kind of touched on this about the frontline hiring, that they need to have the same type of candidate experience as you would expect a knowledge worker to have. I think the thing that's being missed the most, and when you said that high volume, or it's kind of a volume game a lot of times in frontline hiring, and I agree 100%. What I would challenge the practitioners listening is, you need to look at that frontline as being your future workforce. Example, I started out as a teller in a bank, and I fell in love with banking, changed my degree, was putting myself through school full time working as a banker. It completely altered my career trajectory, at least for 6 or 7 years. If they had just kind of treated me like, oh, this is just a very expendable frontline worker, they may have missed out on the opportunity of all the business that I did whenever I was a banker, bringing in loans and all this other kind of stuff. So I do want to challenge someone listening that's got a high volume shop. Look at that as being that feeder into the rest of the organization. And if you
Yep.
do it well on the front end, and you're hiring that quality, and you're, to your point, hiring the based on the assessment and the skill alignment, then that inward trajectory is going to help the volumes on the back end and that knowledge worker space. But it does bring
Yep.
me to a question. I know you do a lot of work with clients, kind of on the front end, bringing talent in the door. Have you seen organizations take that same mindset and point it internally to say, how do I find people who have got the skill sets that maybe I don't know because they've been working for us for 5 years? Have you seen anyone do that? And if not, is this something that you would recommend to use this type of technology with?
Yeah. Definitely. To quickly get back to something that you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, because I think you made a couple of fair points. So indeed, when it comes to linking assessments to performance, I fully agree. Like if it's just these are the three people that are like, then it's still translating bias into score, right? So, but I think that the nice thing about the world of work in which we are today is that job success has become increasingly um, measurable, in that sense that, like, if you take a retail worker, we can measure productivity, how many, what is the average the average ticket size of a customer in the store. And if we look at people in a call center, like how many calls did you resolve, or an NPS or whatever. So we always try to advise our customers to look at the objective performance indicators indeed, and not
Mm.
just hey, can the manager list 3 high performers, 3 low performers, whatever that might be. So that's,
Right.
I fully agree. And regarding your comment about the assessment should be part of the equation in how you evaluate candidates. Yes, although we always do strongly advise at least our high volume customers create some sort of a fast lane for the highest potential candidates. So let's say that if as someone would first go through a conversation on WhatsApp or a chatbot or whatever to some sort of pass the hard requirements for rule, and then has an excellent score on the assessment, we feel that those should be the candidates that you fast forward like ASAP to an interview. So you
Mhm.
should give them right away the opportunity to schedule a call, for example, with or an in-store interview or whatever, because those are the candidates that you would want to, um, well, most likely want to prioritize, and you're doing it in a very unbiased way, right? And that's, if you do it like that, then you don't lose candidates walking to your competitors, because it also needs to be
Right.
fast. So that is generally something that we do recommend. But I also fully agree, of course, there's a reason why we still do job interviews, right? You can't get everything out of an assessment. That's just never going to happen. We are there to measure the things that you cannot measure easily yourself in a job interview. But there's always things where a job interview is going to bring you additional value. To go back to the question that you asked, do you see this technology?
Before we get into that, I think you do bring up a good point. Another missed opportunity I've seen with assessments, they look at it and get the score and go, yes, I should talk to this person, but they don't go through and they actually look at it and say, you know what, I want to pick this apart a little bit during the interview. It should help make that interview a lot more value add because you do have that different point of view. So at one organization, we used an assessment that looked at what drains and what drives people. So it wasn't necessarily a skills assessment. It was more of where do they get their satisfaction. So you gave two examples in an earlier, very fast pace, or one that is, incredibly detail oriented and moves a little slow. I am the fast pace. I always hire people that are very detail oriented to kind of run flank on me. Because I know that that's just not something that I'm good at. I can do it, but it takes a lot more energy than me kind of keeping at a strategic level. So if you put me in an auditor role as an individual contributor, I will be tired by 11 o'clock in the morning, because I'm having to exert a lot more focus versus putting me in something where it's going from one strategy meeting to the next and then turning around in that afternoon and working on the execution plan. I'll do that for 14 hours and it won't even feel like work for me because that drives me. So I do think that having an assessment that can kind of provide, I think you said, some things that you can't see, that's a perfect opportunity to dig into it during the interview. If not, you're missing out on like a fourth of the value of leveraging an assessment in the process anyway. So didn't want to cut you off, but I am super passionate about that because maybe I'm just a nerd whenever I get an assessment on a candidate. I do. I love to know what makes people tick. And I like to use the interview to say, you're almost affirming, like, hey, I went and looked at your results and I want to kind of go into it a little bit further. It reaffirms the value of the assessment. So back to our question that we were going to get to. Should companies point
Can I also quickly reply to that one?
I love it. Go for it. Go for it.
No, because you're saying something that is indeed very accurate and very true. And I think that indeed a lot of organizations, especially in a more high volume nature, just see the assessment as sort of a pass or fail, but then just put it away. I think that maybe using it for interviews is something that some organizations at least try to do a little bit more, but that's then also because most assessments just offer an interview guide, right, with questions that you can ask. And so we do that as well. So we really try to at least tease managers to go into the assessment results a little bit more in depth during the interview. But I think then there's an additional step afterwards, and that is what's actually happening during the onboarding and further training. So what we see is, of course, that every job requires onboarding, and especially in more frontline position, there's usually some sort of training period of a couple of weeks before you actually move into the role itself and are going to handle customers on your own and whatever. And it's such a shame that you then never look back at the assessment results anymore. So something that we also really try to push for is to not only connect to the recruitment department, but also to the training department and say, hey, how can you leverage that? So to give you an example, one of our customers is using us for call center hires. And one of the things that we measure on our platform is how do you handle feedback? So can you give it well, but can you also receive it well? Okay. Also quite relevant, of course, in a context where customers can also give you feedback, and it doesn't always have to be like very positive feedback. Right. So if we then see that the candidate scored okay, but not like incredibly high, it's still good enough to say, okay, let's just, you get the job and we are going to help you with that. But if a trainer knows that from the get-go, then you can also implement that into the training period of a new hire. So I think there's indeed, we use assessments maybe for like 20% of its total value, and there's that other 80% that we just don't leverage. That's I think still leaves a lot of room for opportunity.
I love that.
And to then move to your question, because it's a little bit linked to that one, right?
No, go for it. I love it. I love the back and forth. These are the conversations that need to be had around some of these topics rather than just keeping it surface level. So I love the back and forth.
Yeah, I really agree. But I'm also like the fast paced and a little bit chaotic person that constantly moves back and forth into a
Same,
conversation.
same.
No, so you asked the question like, can you also use this for more for like internal mobility purposes, basically? So I think
No.
it's twofold. So there's two things that we see with our customers. Um, and by the way, I do see that internal mobility becomes more of a thing in the last couple of years. So that's something that I'm really happy with, because I think that
Same.
we have finally reached a point where organizations started to realize maybe we can also look around in our own company before we always get someone from the outside. So that's, I think, a very positive sign. There's two ways in which our customers use our platform for that. So scenario one is there's just a job opening, and it also allows for internal applications, and in that sense the process works exactly the same. I think that I also really advise it to all of our customers. External hiring and internal hiring, you should treat that the same, right? Because otherwise it's also not objective.
100%.
So in that sense, the process is also exactly the same. They just go first through the hard knockout, then they complete the assessment, and then they get a job interview. So that is one way, one way to use the assessment. And like I mentioned, I see that happening much more compared to a couple of years ago. And what I also really like to see there is that this is also a very strong sign that we don't care too much anymore about that more technical or hard knowledge that people should have, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't
Mhm.
recruit so many people from one of our internal positions. So I really do see that shift in, okay, let's look around at the people that we have. If in terms of skills and potential and your learning ability and etc., you are a strong fit with what it takes in order to be successful for the role, we will just teach you the rest. So I think that's a really
Mhm.
positive sign. Um, One other use case that we see on our platform, and I think that is not being used that often by, well, it's being used more often, of course, by our customers, but I think it's not a way in which a lot of organizations use assessments. But typically, when we think of assessments, we have job opening A and we let a candidate complete an assessment and we tell you, are you a match with job A, basically? And if you are not, then party's over, basically. What we also support is doing it the other way around. So we just say complete the full suite, complete all of the games that we have on our platform to give you a very broad perspective then on someone's intelligence, their behavior, their potential, etc. And then we are actually going to tell you what fits best. Because
Mm.
what we do on our platform is we create different personas, let's say. So someone in a retail position or a technical position or a leadership position or finance, whatever, all of them have their different set of skills that you would be looking for. So why not flip it around and use an assessment to tell someone, hey, this could actually be a very interesting next move into the organization. And the nice thing is that to get back to the frontline scope that we discussed earlier, I think that there's a huge opportunity for frontline organizations to get people from frontline to actually an office position in that sense. But the thing
Mhm.
is that a lot of frontline workers don't always know that well, like, what is it then that I should be looking for? So they go
Right.
to maybe their manager and say, hey, I actually want to keep working for this company, but I want to move into more of an office position, for example, but I just don't know what. Then this can actually help you. So I think that if we would use assessments more like that, there's a huge untapped talent pool within organizations that we can start leveraging.
No, I think that's I love the insight there, and it's funny you were talking about being able to take the full suite and then being able to be matched to a job. In my day job, we actually had some data that supported that. Like that's one of the use cases that a lot of candidates are completely okay and trusting of AI to kind of say,
Yeah.
okay, you've got these skills. Have you considered these jobs? And I think too, recruiters could use it to kind of do some sourcing. Say, I need someone with critical thinking that has done product management in a tech space, and been able to leverage some of the assessments to say this person shows very high on critical thinking. They also show very high on product management. And then you go in and you look at their skills. Think about the employee experience of me reaching out to you and say, hey, Charlotte, I know you're not looking for something, but here's this job. You've been a software developer and you've been a project manager. there's this entry level or mid level product manager role. You have the core competencies and you have the skills, maybe not necessarily the experience directly, but there's enough transferable skills. Is this something that you might be interested in? You'll never get that person to leave. I mean, I
Yeah.
stayed at a company for 11 years because every 2 years it was a different version or an addition or a change in my role. So yeah, I was there for 11 years, but it wasn't in this, I was in the same type of role, but completely different scopes, completely different responsibilities. And it kept it interesting. And I think that that's a fantastic use case for, some of the assessments pointing it inward. Well,
Yeah.
we have reached our time limit. I feel like we could probably go on for another hour. I love the banter back and forth. And if someone's interested in connecting with you, where can they find you?
Well, LinkedIn is where I spend
Obviously.
a lot of my days. No, so they can always contact me on LinkedIn or go to our website if they would like to get a little bit more information. But LinkedIn is where we met, right? So
Yes, it
it's always a
was.
good
It was.
platform to do that.
I have to give the big blue monster its due. I love having these types of conversations and having someone kind of press on my preconceived ideas on what HR should look like. So thank you so much for coming on, and I am quite sure that we'll probably have more to talk about soon, and I'll have you back on.
All right. Thank you so much for the invitation.